Yeah.
Sorry, I record too soon, huh? Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Quarantine. I caught Mitch off guard, so my apologies for that opening.
I'm just always laughing about something
It's true.
at this point.
It's true. I'm Amy. I use she, her, hers pronouns.
And I'm Mitch, and I use he, him, his pronouns.
Mitch, what's our question of the week?
Our question of the week is, what was your absolute favorite toy to play with as a child?
So, we talked a little bit before this video started being recorded, and we did like a super deep dive of toys from when we were kids. And I think I would have to say a couple of my favorite toys would be the Sky Dancer, the little doll that had like a super pretty flowery base that you would put your hand on and pull a string, and then the doll would shoot into the air and her wings would like fly around. I could get some real air with that.
Some people remember that purely because there was a Vine video of a little girl on Christmas morning showing hers off, and it flew into the fireplace.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's also tied with, I spent a lot of time playing with like Barbies and Bratz dolls. Barbie went on a lot of dates with her friends that were not Ken. I don't know that I really ever had Ken dolls. So that's my childhood. And I really loved American Girl dolls.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah. That was a classic.
I loved the history.
Yeah. So one of my very best friends, Sage, who I talk about all the time, she and I both were hugely obsessed with Felicity. And she actually had a Felicity-themed birthday party, and her mom made mop caps for all of us. It was awesome.
Oh my gosh, I love American Girl dolls.
Yeah. I always was fascinated with the Revolutionary War, though. Like, I talk about that all the time. Constantly. So it's a pretty natural fit for me. But I was telling Amy that my favorite was my sibling who I shared a wall with had this train set that she wasn't really wild about playing with. And I could not have been more obsessed with that thing. And so I usurped it over time. And like well into middle school, I still remember like setting up elaborate new towns every time I built it, and like building bridges.
You did that when we were in our supervisor's office though. Like,
oh my gosh, yeah.
Our supervisor, Jen, love you, Jen, has a bench that you can open up, and there's like sand, kinetic sand, and like townspeople's and houses. Mm-hmm. And I have a very fond memory of both of us having sort of a stressful day at work. So we sat on the floor in Jen's office, and you built a little kinetic sand village, and I played with magnetic sand, and I made a little like dinosaur takeover in my magnetic sand, and you made a whole little town in your kinetic sand.
It was a pretty metropolitan area. Like, there were a lot of roads and serious buildings and that. I don't know, something about that is so therapeutic to me. Like, I get mad when I play The Sims and I can't fully design the entire town. Yeah. Because I would love to build the whole thing from the ground up.
Yeah, I agree.
So fun.
I agree. You could do that in, like, Sims 2, but The Sims 4 doesn't really allow for that.
Yeah.
Unless you've got the little add-on Newport Village. Anyway, we're not here to talk about The Sims. I love The Sims though.
Yeah, but we are continuing to talk about LGBT history for LGBT History Month. So this week, you've got a story for us.
I do. So I sort of stumbled across this when I was just like goofing around on the internet, and I had never heard of this before. I'm going to be talking about the history of the high five. Like high five, bud. High five. You know who that's from? Glenberg. So,
tell me more.
I got a lot of information from an article on ESPN.com. It's a really cool article. I will link to it. It has a lot of like sports vernacular. I'm not an athletic person. I played soccer in high school, and it started and ended in high school. So, I mean, I like watching baseball, and I have a memory of watching the Boston Red Sox World Series when I was in college. My dad is a huge Red Sox fan, so it was one of the first, I think I don't remember if it was the first time they had gotten to the World Series or it was the second time after breaking the curse of the Bambino. It doesn't matter. I have a memory of watching baseball on the phone with my dad. So I like baseball, and I was really kind of interested to hear that high five came from baseball. So the high five was created in 1977 by a man named Glenn Burke. So Burke was an outfielder for the LA Dodgers, and he created the high five after a game where some history was made. So it was October 2nd, 1977, and Dusty Baker, who was a left fielder for the Dodgers, had just hit a home run, making it his 30th home run. And in doing so, it also made history for the Dodgers being the first team ever in history to have 4 players that had hit 30 home runs or more. So, everyone was super excited. Everyone was exuberant.
Go sports!
Sports! That would have been exactly how I handled that. But Burke handled it by, throwing his hand in the air to greet his friend as he came off of the field. And Dusty Baker, not knowing what to do, just sort of, reached up and slapped his hand. And that was the first high five.
Wow.
So the reason I'm talking about it, though, is because Glenn Burke was also a gay man. Mm-hmm. He was reported to be a super funny guy. He had a very exuberant personality. He was just joyous all the time. And this was reported by the then manager, Tommy Lasorda Sr., who was very famous in baseball. But he was also a gay man. So he tried to keep his sexuality a secret during his active playing days, even though there had been some rumors about it. But because in those days it was super frowned upon, he was even offered $75,000 to get married. So I thought it was super interesting that later on the Dodgers executive was like, no, it was for honeymoon fees. It wasn't a bribe to keep him quiet so he could stay playing. We just wanted to offer him some help with honeymoon fees.
Because that's standard.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and so Burke rejected the deal by saying, oh, I guess you mean to a woman. So he was like, no, thank you. I'm super good on that, actually. But it was also around this time that Burke had gotten into a relationship with Spunky Lasorda, whose real name was Tommy Lasorda Jr. So he was Lasorda Sr.'s son. Spunky was profiled in 1992 by a magazine, and it said that it was basically his homosexuality was an open secret. Lasorda Sr. continued to deny that his son was gay, even after Spunky had died in 1991 due to pneumonia. And in the GQ magazine portrayal, I guess, I'm forgetting the word that it actually is, but...
Feature,
thank you. His death certificate had said that he had died due to complications relating to AIDS.
Yeah, because pneumonia is part of the AIDS complex as it progresses into the later stage.
Yeah, and so at that point, Lasorda is quoted as saying, my son wasn't gay, no way. So, like most relationships, and this is the second time I've talked about how queer baseball is actually historically proven to be, but like most queer relationships in sports, the relationship was hidden for a lot of years. And even today, people still argue over whether or not they were together or they were just really close friends. Whether they were together or not, though, Burke's association with Lasorda Jr. Caused irreversible damage to Burke's career, and it also damaged his relationship with Lasorda Sr. So, like I had said, Lasorda Sr. was the manager of the Dodgers, and when he caught wind of this relationship between Spunky and Glenn, he really started turning his back on him. He was pretty nasty. He ended up trading Glenn Burke back to the Oakland A's in exchange for another player who was already beyond his prime. His argument was that Glenn Burke hadn't proven himself as a player yet, and this other person had. But it was very clear why he was making the trade. And Burke's sister was reported to saying that when Lasorda Sr. sort of turned his back on Glenn Burke, it was like a father turning his back on his son. Because if you remember just a few minutes earlier when I was talking, Lasorda Sr. was saying, he was this great guy. He was super energetic. He was so funny. And those exact antics started being why he started coming down harder on Glenn Burke. So despite the fact that the high five really became a symbol of the Dodgers, and then later on sports at large, Lasorda Sr. still to this day maintains that he doesn't know the origins of the high five, even though he was there when it was created. So throughout the 80s, when Glenn Burke was with the Oakland A's, he was super mistreated by the Oakland A's manager, Billy Martin. Billy Martin often threw around slurs for relating to gay men. And he also wouldn't play Burke. Teammates wouldn't change or shower in the same room when Glenn Burke was there. And then this treatment, coupled with a knee injury and a demotion, led to him retiring when he was only 27 years old, which is absolutely unheard of. Burke wound up, though, becoming a shortstop star in the Gay Softball League, and he eventually swept the Gay Softball World Series. So he did, make a name for himself regardless. He openly came out in 1982 in a magazine called Inside Sports, and the high five was then named as being a defiant symbol of gay pride, especially because it was mostly shown as two men with their hands clasped together in the air. So I thought that was really, really powerful to hear. But unfortunately, around this time, he also struggled with some personal demons, including substance misuse. And then he eventually tested positive for HIV as well. So at this time, the Oakland A's actually really banded together, and they acknowledged, we really mistreated this man. We need to be here for him. So they really stepped up and helped him financially quite a bit in his last few years. He did end up passing away in 1995. But in 2015, he was honored publicly at Pride Night at the Oakland A's home field, and Glenn Burke's brother was invited to throw the first pitch. So Burke died believing that his high five was the legacy, and it's a legacy that continues to live on. And now whenever you give a high five, you'll know that a gay man, an openly gay African-American baseball player, was the man who created the high five.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's a really brief little delve into history, but it's something that's so interesting, and I don't know that I ever even considered the origins of the high five. It's just something you're raised to know.
Mm-hmm. Well, in our adolescence and childhood before even, every T-ball game I ever had, you do the line of the high fives as you're going down the field, and everybody does it. And so to find out that this is the origin of it is really interesting, because clearly that was not known, or they probably wouldn't have impressed that on us as vulnerable children at the time,
And there's some disputes around who created it, because a couple of NBA players also take credit for creating it a few years later, but it is very largely credited to Glenn Burke. So there's quite a few different creation lores around it, but it is most widely known as being attributed to Glenn Burke.
Well, this is a theme for the lesbian and gay community for sure. I spoke briefly last week about Edith Lake Wilkinson, who she actually was one of the original people to do white line printmaking out of the Provincetown art colony, but she had a jilted lover who had her institutionalized for being a lesbian, and all of her work was locked up in a trunk and stuffed in an attic, and it wasn't until her great niece discovered that and pulled them out and looked at them against the history of this art form that had been credited to all of these men in Provincetown that it was found out that Edith actually pioneered it before they were doing it. But she never got any of the credit for it because she'd been institutionalized.
Yeah, it's definitely a theme that we see over and over again, and it's why we talk about LGBTQ history so often on this page, is because there's a ton of LGBTQ history, but it's very poorly credited, and often it's handed off to other people to take credit for.
Yeah. A lot of it was intentionally destroyed as well. So.
Well, and I mean, if we really want to do a deep dive, going back to talking about things being destroyed, when I was talking about the Monocle Club, a lot of documents were destroyed there. And then when I was talking about the All-American Women's League, a lot of documentation was destroyed so that there couldn't necessarily be justice, and it was just a mistake.
Mm-hmm. Well, and too, like, to even further be a bummer, during the Holocaust, the Pink Triangle were people who were charged under a section of German law that outlawed homosexuality. Mm-hmm. And when the camps were liberated, those were the only people that weren't freed. They were kept in prison, most of them for the rest of their lives.
Mm-hmm. So when we, not to be a bummerville here, and we will bring this back up now, but when we talk about how important it is to have LGBTQ history known and to be proud of it, and why we talk about why pride matters, is because these are the things we're coming back from over and over and over again. I mean, the Stonewall riots happened less than 10 years before the High Five, and like, we think of things as being so far removed, but we're really only talking 50 years.
Mm-hmm. And it's all these little moments of defiance, of pushback, that really kept the momentum and the work going. Mm-hmm. So it is really important to celebrate them and to share those stories for the next generation, because like, this is stuff Amy and I say all the time that we mostly have discovered by accident, not because it was taught to us, but by accident.
I can tell you that I did not go on the internet searching for like sports history. That's probably never going to really be in my browser,
right? Unless
I'm specifically looking up something that I've just stumbled across. So I think that it's a beacon of hope that now we are stumbling upon more pieces of LGBTQ history on the internet than we were before, because that means it's being talked about. And talking about things is what continues those legacies, and talking about things is what continues to educate generations beyond us. And it's really important that it is given its own stage, because it spent so much time being held down.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, so we'll be coming back next week with some more history. But in the meantime, if you have any other things you think are interesting, or if you've got more information about baseball or any of the history around the High Five or anything like that, let us know. And otherwise, we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.